But it's one of those small things.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes can't tell if people get too lost in the sauce of both sides. You know, like there should be a common ground.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there should be the over sexualization, but I think that these shows are less harmful than the actual harm that's being done in our society. And
right.
if we're telling you that guns are a problem, we're telling you and we're seeing real life examples of how guns can be affecting the youth in their lives,
mm-hmm.
that should be a bigger priority
right.
than drag.
It's the same thing we were saying before, like put your money where your mouth is. It's like if you want to protect kids, it can't only be from this sexual content. Like you have to actually step up and protect them in real tangible ways in terms of their physical safety as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah.
I agree.
And it's like the same thing's been happening right now with this like whole don't say gay thing in Florida, where they're now trying to expand it from, and this is like a slippery slope, but it goes from that K through 3 classrooms where, you know, it kind of, there's an argument there. It's like maybe kindergartners, first graders, second graders don't necessarily need to be having lessons about the gender spectrum and about sexuality and all this stuff. You know, on the flip side, now they're trying to expand that into middle school classrooms. And it's like, I learned about sex in middle school and didn't see any problem with that. I didn't feel scarred by that or like not ready to hear that kind of information. So it's like, it's interesting how like when the government starts to get involved in the morality of like parents' choices, what can their kids be exposed to, what is the best way to protect kids, that like then they start trying to like expand it to people that it doesn't really make sense for. It's like where there's an argument for the younger kids, but like for the older kids, like now what are you trying to do? Like now you're like over protecting. It's like it definitely, I agree, it has to be some kind of compromise.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that introducing it in elementary school,
mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm on both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
My personal thing is what, on the opposite side is, what is the problem with them learning more about their,
mm-hmm.
about their gender or genders and
yeah.
sexual orientation. I think middle school, it really is the appropriate time to really dive in and educate more, because a lot of us in our generation at least, we had to find out through trial and error and stories.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't really have a class that went in and started talking about people who were bisexual,
right.
or lesbian, who were gay.
Yeah.
You only had to start seeing that once the men and women in your class started going through those changes
mm-hmm.
in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So me going to middle school in Milford in 5th grade, for example, I wasn't ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
When I made the move and moved over to Framingham, there wasn't a lot of people who were open about that where I was from Milford.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a different change, and I think that in middle school it would be nice for them to have that kind of
background already kind of set, like earlier on.
Something small, but they go more in depth in middle school.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, I think just.
I don't think anything's gonna change. I don't see kids doing like I'm, just.
Yeah, I think there's a way to do it in a way that's thoughtful. That's not like you're showing like anatomical like charts to like kindergartners. I don't think that's what's being said. It's like maybe you make a children's book with like illustrations that opens their minds to the idea that it's not just this hard binary category man woman. Hey, there is a spectrum here. What is a spectrum? Like let's look at the color spectrum. Let's look at the light spectrum. Like let's look at the gender spectrum. All of these, you know what I'm saying? And it's like just teach kids about identity, teach kids about like self-expression, and then just let them figure it out. You know, like that's the important part.
Don't push them. And that's everything. Don't push them to be straight. Don't push them to be gender fluid, for example. Just let them know the basis, and then eventually let them explore.
Yeah, we have to know the difference between education and indoctrination, right?
Exactly.
That's a very important distinction, because if you're educating, you're providing objective information, and then you're letting kids figure it out and make their own decisions. That's what I support, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying as well, right? Indoctrination is exactly that, right? It's like you're trying to force them or coerce them or lead them in a certain direction that, really isn't necessarily like going to work for everyone, or like isn't the best way to go.
I agree.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's see what other topics we can shoot off about here. So I had a couple like questions just about like music stuff, because I know that's like where our like kind of main commonality was, like in terms of like building like our relationship earlier on. We had some like great conversation earlier about like what it's meant to be like, and this is a hard shift from what we were just talking about, but like kind of what it's meant to be like an independent artist, in terms of like not only like the music itself, but also kind of what it means to you as like a person. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that, and like just talking. One of the questions I had was like, measuring success as like an independent artist, and this is something that I go through as well, and I'm sure a lot of independent artists out there that are trying to like build an audience and build a platform can relate to. But like what ways do you measure success by beyond just we of course we can look at like stats and numbers and streams and videos and all these things, right? Sales, but is there more to measuring like how you think about like success as an artist and kind of where you find the significance in it, what it really means to you?
I mean, for me, it's a really open-ended question, just because
Right.
we all measure success differently. But I'm a very metric-based person. So a lot of it at the beginning was just trying things out and starting to put myself not only in the shoes of the artist, but the kid that I was dreaming about being the artist. And what are some of the things that would make me feel accomplished, that are just basic footnotes for some of the people? So, for example, reaching 1,000 streams, that's like a milestone.
Right.
For whatever song, or even collectively at a certain period of time. Being able to release a full-length project, whether it's an EP or an album, something that I created from start to finish.
Yes.
Being able to buy your first beat, fully purchased, being able to record.
Like have a real contract for
exactly.
it.
Have everything settled, have your cover art settled, and putting on DSPs. Being able to perform for the first time.
Right.
And I used to have an open mind at first with open mics and being like, I want to do open mics, and then I got that checked off. And then it was, all right, now I want to do club performances and open up for other artists.
Yeah.
And then I did that. But then you start thinking there's more beyond there. How do you get there?
Right.
So when I started dialing things back and started thinking about what are some of the things that I've done. Well, I've also done a music video before. I've done an interview before.
Right.
First one was with you, of course. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
And being able to do other small things, like my first photo shoot, being able to pay for another artist doing their feature, being able to help book an artist for their photo shoot, and doing all these other small tangible things made me realize that what I did was not only just enough, but more than enough than what I saw, being in my room one day in 2013, 14, and then 15, all those years, thinking, do I even want to rap ever again? And compared to where I was doing in high school, Wagner. So it's nice when you start thinking back over the last several years, all the accomplishments that you've done. But to wrap it all up in a bow, I do things based on a metric. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that's so important to say, because it's like, I tend towards like the more like immaterial part of it, I guess, the more abstract part of it. But I think in terms of like, and you can apply this to anything else, but in terms of goal setting, right, having those tangibles, being able to write down a list of like actual like a checklist of like, have I done this? Have I reached this metric, right? And not necessarily reaching like maybe your goal is to get a song with like 1,000 streams or something. And if you get really close to that, it's like it's still valuable in that, right? It teaches you kind of like where you are right now. It's all valuable information. But the idea of having a tangible thing that you can check off, I think, is really important to hear, because it's like so many times it is really abstract in terms of where am I, like what am I doing wrong, and being able to, like you said, see something through from start to finish, right? There's so many times where you start a project and people just kind of leave it amorphous. It doesn't really ever solidify into something. And I've experienced that, and I've also experienced the other thing that you're talking about, which is having a germ of an idea, a seed of what you want something to eventually be. And I've used this metaphor in my music, but it's like I do really think about songs like things that are growing, like plants or things like that, where it's like you do have to nurture it, you have to like really give it time and love and really like water it and put effort into it. And if you're determined enough and you're like, you can do it, like if you have the resources to put it together, like, and you can release a fully finished project, like there's such a satisfaction to that, where even if it doesn't necessarily meet those metric goals, right, there is a tangible feeling of success in just in doing that. It is difficult to do, and it is, extremely satisfying.
Even if it is still for that time period. Like I look at Trap Brandon, for example. My like first, I would say like my debut kind of EP to like show people that like this is my first solo project in 2015 that I recorded at a studio that wasn't on my own personal laptop, on beats that I paid for leases and everything like that, and having some kind of Twitter promotional hype leading up into it in 2015. Even though that project was absolute trash.
Yes,
In that time. Oh my God, that was probably one of the greatest accomplishments of my individual creative life.
Yeah.
Next to, the music video I made in TV class. Next to a lot of individual creative things, and it's one of those things where I look back on all those projects and I think about where I was mentally, physically, and spiritually, and just seeing the joy that I had in some others as well, made me keep going, made me realize what I was doing was worth all the money that I was putting into time and effort, and
For sure.
just being able to just say that at least with my kids or my niece and nephews, or even the kids that I still mentor, that I've babysat over years and coached and everything, that I still have a relationship with, being able to show them that, sure, I didn't make it, but these are the stepping stones to even just make yourself do that push, because if you can do some of those things, that could be you in the future, and go beyond. And it would be nice to have that blueprint, showed to other people. So for people like Sousa, for example, showing him that in Johnny and a bunch of others that we started working with later on, after you and I and Devin and Wagner and everybody else started working, being able to show the younger group and Jimmy and all them, like, some of the tools to do to go forward, I think that is something that I'll never, ever, ever be upset about.
I think both of those are so important to say. One is the idea of being able to pass it on, like the knowledge down to the next generation, is something that doesn't get spoken about a lot, but is really important in hip hop, is the idea that like the people that are established, the legends, will often help out and put on, artists that are coming up and stuff, and that can happen at the macro scale if it's like a Snoop Dogg or whoever it is that's like putting on the next like big thing. Passing on the torch to a Kendrick or the younger generation. That's always kind of been a part of hip hop and that culture. But in music in general and the arts, right, it's like, that is so important, right? It's always been a master apprenticeship kind of like sort of endeavor in any artistic thing. And it's like, I've definitely had mentors in terms of whether it's you or like guys like Seventh or Renzo that I work with as an engineer that teach me things about music, that help me along the way, right, that were in before me and that I've learned from, that's been invaluable to me. But the other thing that you said that I think is extremely understated is the idea of the time capsule. Is that's one of the biggest values to music and to art in general, is like, it is a capsule back into those like core memories, who you were exactly, like what kind of like way that you were thinking, what emotions were you feeling at that time. And again, it's just attached to a certain time in your life. Like when you were talking about Trap Brandon, that made me think of like Sheets. For me was that, it was that like, I don't love that song. Like that's my dirty little secret. I really don't love that song, but that is my most popular song that I've put out. And it's not like it has like a million streams or anything like that, but for me, where I was at that time was big, and it caused a little ripple and a stir in my little like bubble, in terms of I like worked at this summer camp and released this song, and then it became like they played it all the time and I would perform it for them, and it was really fun. But like that song is not only a song, it also for me is like a portal back into that like era and where I was at that time and how was I thinking. I still remember like where I was when I was writing that song and things like that. So I think that is so valuable. It's like the sentimentals behind the music, because when you're thinking about it from the audience's perspective, really they only get to hear the song. They don't hear all the time the story behind it, unless there's like a vlog about its creation, or some really nice music video, something that tells the story, right, beyond like the music itself. But yeah, I mean, for the artist itself, I think that is really cool, like to look at, especially if you have like multiple projects over time, right, and really you can see how you're growing as an artist, where you learned your lessons, where you maybe made the same kind of mistake. Oh, I should have done this, but I used this like auto-tune effect again, and I shouldn't have done that, or whatever it is. Like we always, as artists, are pretty critical of our past work. Like you were saying, like that song or project sucks. Like I can't tell you how many projects from like the earlier parts of the when I was starting as an artist in like 13, 14, 15, whatever, like that kind of time period when I was just starting out, but I listen back to now and kind of laugh like openly, like just laugh at kind of some of the stuff that I was saying, like how I like was going off it. But there are also things that I'm like, oh, I should kind of bring that back a little bit. Like I kind of lost a little bit of that. Maybe I should incorporate that a little bit. So it's definitely a great way. It's like a bank of information to go back to, but also like core memories and experiences, which is really valuable.
Oh yeah, and I think it's nice too, because you can see that parallel with the actual like mainstream, superstar artists
Mhm.
anywhere down to your underground artists.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've listened to like a Chris Brown verse, for example, and I'm like, I know this was definitely recorded
Mhm.
in that 2015, 2016 era.
Mhm.
Even though this verse is on a song in 2019, 2020, you could just tell. It's based on the cadence, it's based on the flow, the ad-libs,
Mhm.
where he was at the time. This had to have been a track from that album that he had just released that didn't make it, for example. And I think it's nice to be able to put yourself in that perspective as a fan
Mhm.
of the art and be able to see that. But also it's nice that in some ways you could play a song and never know when the verse was recorded. It could sound like
Yeah.
a fresh verse unless you say something that gives it away. Like I swear Jeice sometimes will just take songs that are about to come out and plug in a bar that just happened last week, for example. Just for the content. And you know what? The only way you ever believe that a verse is that new is unless that situation
Just happened,
happens,
yeah.
So it's nice that you can kind of plug and play certain aspects, but also be a blind listener and just think like, wow, when was this made?
Yeah.
You know?
I'm sure that that's like a big marketing point, I think, for a lot of songs is like, oh, this was like a new like verse that was like uncovered from years ago, but it sounds like it was like could have been made like last week or something. It still is like hot today, or it was but it was recorded in like 2009 or something, and you're like, oh my god, like that's crazy.
Well, it depends to the longevity, but of course,
Right.
and that's the cool thing because I was listening to the Joe Budden Pod, for example, and they were breaking down a song that just released with Chris Brown, and
The psychic one?
not the psychic one. It was with Chloe, I believe.
Chloe Bailey.
Yeah. And I guess that song was already a reference track over 3 years old that Joe has had for years.
Right.
And the original version had somebody else and a Meek Mill verse and the Chris Brown verse.
Wow.
But she bought the song, put her flow on it. But if you listen to that song, I bet you would have thought that verse was new. For example, some people just don't know that was a 3-year-old song, 3-year-old verse. But it's also nice though that it's timeless, and I think that's one thing that has been my biggest problem is I saved, in my opinion, all of my good records from 2019 and 2020. I saved them and I still haven't released them because at the time, I always thought it wasn't ready. I just, like Vuitton and Section and a couple other songs that still haven't come out yet, it wasn't the time. The pandemic really slowed a lot of momentum and a lot of the creativity that was going into it, and I just felt like those songs were so good that the right time they needed to come out, and now that it's almost 4 years later, and I still want to release them with newer songs, I'm curious to see when people think these songs were recorded.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, it does speak to another problem sometimes that we have as artists, which is like the seeking perfection is like, we want it to sound just like the way you hear it in your head, and like, when do you accept like, all right, this maybe is as good as it's going to be, and when it's like hesitation versus like, is it worth it to hang on to this and try to keep working on it and make it a little better, or should I just put it out? And like, I had that experience recently where I was gonna put out some of the songs. I had this recent EP, Eris EP, and it got like a few songs got cut from the final kind of version, and I was gonna release those cuts as like its own little kind of mini project. But they hadn't gone through that final like mixing process, and I ended up pulling them. I didn't end up releasing it. I wasn't super happy with how they were sounding, and it's like I had it up like on like through my distributor and all these things. It had a release date and everything, and it was like a week before, and I was like, because it's like when you're putting something out, it's just this feeling like people are going to hear this, and it's like, this is going to represent me where I am right now as an artist, and it's like, that's sometimes the problem with releasing older material that you have saved up. Does this really reflect who I am anymore? Do I want people to still see this part of me, or is this something that like, maybe is just better kept in the bank? And that struggle internally, we want to release a lot of content, we want to release like consistent like streaming music, and when you have these songs banked, like, it's hard not to be like, let me just record all these and put them out, but it's like, you want to also give people your best work and your best representation of where you are.
I get that. And you know what's crazy? Can we swear? When I say bitch, for example?
Yeah,
okay. So, for example, I have a couple of songs that are coming out on this project that I want to release. But I'm working with a Italian producer, for example, and just like the time capsule it is, I say bitch a couple of times on some of the songs that are from 2019. And although it's not necessarily in a negative connotation, it's more a pronoun, that doesn't reflect who I am now.
Yeah.
However, it can almost indirectly reflect where I was and who I was then. And in the song titles, you're not putting section dash 2019.
Right.
So for your employers or new fans or new people, oh, that's just where he was during that time. I think that you're gonna have to just take it for face value, and that's one thing that I'm nervous about. Where it's just like, my girlfriend, for example, like we weren't together during those period of times, so
yeah, there's songs that maybe reflect more of like a single lifestyle and stuff that you don't necessarily, but you don't want to disrespect her girl by putting that out, and it's like
her friends thinking, oh, he just recorded this last week or last
like
month
he must be out doing something,
Exactly, like nice girlfriend.
Right.
But you
yeah.
know what I'm saying?
No, it's totally.
No,
I mean, I feel that so hard. I work in the public school system, and I have to be extremely careful, squeaky clean, and I've found some success doing that. My students know that I make music and they listen to it, and I don't feel bad about them listening to it because I know there's not a lot of swears in it, and there's, fairly squeaky clean lyrics.
Yeah.
But, I think, even if I do sometimes feel like I have to censor myself of what I'd like to be able to say, and I feel like there are parts of myself that don't get expressed as fully honestly as I could, because I sometimes am trying to cloak it for a bit of a younger audience, which is, I don't have a problem with doing. I understand it. It is kind of what it is, and this kind of leads me into my next question, which was kind of like, how difficult is it to just balance like things like wanting to be an artist and have an artistic pursuit, but you're not quite at the place where it can be your job yet, full time, and having to balance things like a personal life and a career, because that's something that I've definitely grappled with in the past couple of years.
I think that's probably one of the hardest things ever. I mean, for me, music started off a rock band in 2008,
which is awesome.
Rekindled back
awesome
in
story.
2014, based off of another situation where a friend, Mike, and we had Audacity on the laptop,
Mm-hmm.
But what the problem for me has always been is I've always sought out a career and or a job path. And of course, music is a career and a job path in its own, and just like any other job you need experience. In order to get there, you need foot zones, certificates,
professionalism, like
whatever.
you need to kind of treat it as a job,
You need stepping stones to get there. So of course I was making those stepping stones, but I also realized those stepping stones were more expensive than, maybe not college, for example, but they were very cost-effective examples, and that really hurt my momentum financially and mentally, because I wasn't able to get to where I wanted to go right in that moment.
Right.
But it was something that I was excited to still combat and still try. Something that not a lot of people can say that they've actually been able to do, where they find themselves in a situation that is either you're paying for this album or you're paying for rent, for example. And having to push that back and everything else like that. And of course rent took, priority, of course, but that hurts that kind of psyche, and being able to balance that side of financial life and trying to put that towards music, and then trying to go out with friends, for example. Or now I have to work a second or third job to pay for music, because at this time I'm still in college and I'm only making $16, $17 an hour per time. Or now I'm a post-grad and I'm applying for jobs, but if I do so, if they find my socials, for example, are they going to see content that they're looking to advance someone in their individual career, or are they looking to just pacify someone in the meantime who may just be looking to do this job to pay for their music until something happens? So that has always been something in the back of my mind too, where it's just like, I have to somewhat separate the two, because not only did that, but just like you, I coached high school track as well. I coached swim lessons and gymnastics lessons to the general public with you as well. You know what I mean? So we had actual moldable kids looking up to us, especially as ages go up. And then you have parents that are savvy on social media as well. So having to keep Brandon Johnson separate from Brandon J or Brandon Jeice was probably the hardest part of being able to keep that music and lifestyle and momentum separate.
And I think that's like really interesting to say, because for me it's like I understand like the idea of keeping it separate, and I found that impossible because like of what you're saying, right, with these kids or even parents, but like kids mostly, like if they like look up to you at all, like if you're in a position where you're like coaching them or teaching them, whatever it is, right, if you're working with kids, they're gonna search your name and find your stuff, like they're going to find it. So for me, it's been like, how can I thoughtfully put stuff out in a way that when, not if, like when they find this, is it going to be something that loses me my job, or is it going to be something that makes me a better person? So it's been more for me like a way of how do I fuse these two, right? It's like it doesn't have to be one or the other. And again, I think eventually my ideal trajectory is to be at a point where it's like, okay, now I've gotten to a point in music where I can take some time off my career, right? And I think a lot of people think about it that way. But at the same time, right, it's like, how can I put out stuff in a way that, like, again, like I was saying, like when they find it, like, is it going to be the thing that loses you your job, right? And it's like, you have to be mindful about who your inevitable audience is going to be, right? You want to market to a desirable demographic. Like, I want to make music that is kind of made for, people that want to put it on at a party or a playlist or something, right? Or play it at a club or something, right? You want to make this kind of more adult themed or, marketable music. But for me, it's like, okay, I've had to, adapt, and I've really found joy in this. Is like making music that kids can enjoy more. Like they're not even kids, but like younger people, high schoolers, right? And a lot of high schoolers like poppy sounding music and stuff. So I've been able to kind of use more of that skill set to make that blended kind of music where it's like it's not just I have a love for rap and hip hop, and I love to do that on songs, and I still do on almost every song. But a lot of my songs that I'm making now have a more I think poppy or mainstream kind of like you could hear it maybe on the radio or something, and like
or Ninja Class.
Or Ninja Class, exactly. And it's like where it's like a kid, and again, like kids love that. Kids love to, like you were saying before about like the younger generation, like they like to see that people they look up to are doing something that is creative, right? It's not just that you're like a great coach and a role model. It's also that you're doing something that they find cool, and that gets them inspired. Is that? Do you think that like? I don't know. What do you find like continues to inspire new music for you? Do you find that it's like kind of always been like life experiences? Do you usually kind of set an intention for a certain topic that you like to write about? Does it kind of vary song to song?
Start with a beat.
Yeah.
To be honest.
No, I agree. I usually do the same.
I definitely will say music has changed for me a lot the last several years. I recorded more music in 2019, first than ever. But more importantly, more music in 2018 than I did the last 3 years. So, as of late, it really just has to be a capturing beat for me to just boom, buckle down, and I'm writing it right here, right now.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
I can just.
I've never been able to start with the lyrics. I've always had to start with like an instrumental, and usually. I try to base it off life experience in as much as possible, but like there are just sometimes where you hear a beat and you know what it should sound like, immediately kind of what the pattern ought to be, and you can usually hear a mood in it, right? Whether it's a major or minor chord based song, like you can kind of hear kind of what emotions maybe go best with this kind of music. And I think, we've been able to kind of capture that, right? So I definitely agree, right? Starting from the feel of the music and then taking, like, the lyrics will often organically just kind of come out of that, right? I definitely relate to that part of the process.
I mean, it's rare. Like, I think it's harder. I can write a hook, for example, based off of a topic, or I'll spit like a 4-bar freestyle or whatever, and you can make that sound like it could be a hook, for example, based on the content or the context to it. But I think that it's so hard to just apply lyrics and paste it onto a beat, because if you may have to add words or take words out, and then it also just messes up the context of the subject too much, that I don't know, I've just never really been able to do so. But sometimes I will be inspired. Like, I will hear a beat, and if I'm going, like, for example, I've gone through breakups, and I've made a couple songs, for example, and I've heard the beat, and I'm like, okay, this fits my sad boy's mood today. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I just start going in on how I'm a piece of shit, for example.
Yeah.
But that's the thing.
What are my toxic traits?
Yeah, exactly. That's the theme, and then boom, the next beat's like the next up-tempo Chris Brown vibes, and I'm like, you know what, I'm the shit. Boom, like, you know what I'm saying? I'm doing so well. So it just depends on where I'm at.
Yep.
But more importantly, the beat, and I also think environment.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I write better when I'm on the road, like physically in a car, for example, open mind. Even if it's just like a couple bars here, I play a beat, and I'm like, oh, that's nice. All right, cool, write that down.
A lot of times for me, it's like laying in bed as I'm going to sleep. Like, I'll just like have my phone nearby or like a piece of paper, and like sometimes like just one line will like pop into my head, and I gotta write that down, and then find a way to incorporate it into a song later on. Now I know you mentioned that you were working with like this Italian producer and stuff. So do you find that you go like what's the word I'm looking for, like I'm gonna blank the word, but you outsource for your beats mostly, or have you tried making beats before? Like, do you dabble in production at all?
I made 3 beats ever in my life, and that was in 2009.
Okay.
Never again.
Okay.
Now, of course, I've thought about it before,
Yeah.
and my biggest problem is that I don't have enough music knowledge.
Right.
And I think that also plays a big factor. We have, especially due to social media and how things have changed over the years. Remember before, like you said, Snoop Dogg will be putting on this new artist. It doesn't matter what his background was.
Right.
However he got to that label is how he's being presented to us now.
Right.
Nowadays, you could blow up off TikTok, you could blow up off Twitter still, you could blow up off
YouTube,
Instagram still, YouTube, for example, and not have that kind of backing, and you can have your own kind of backing to go with you. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, and the tools that you have access to now, again, you really don't need much
Exactly.
more than like a laptop if you have it, and like
Exactly.
you can just have like GarageBand and still make
Exactly.
cool songs.
But I think we need to get to a point where we can start offering some more of that knowledge to some kids in school beyond 3rd and 4th, 5th grade.
Yeah, for sure. Like Haverhill, like we're recording this in Haverhill right now, and the Haverhill Public Library is going through a whole renovation right now. And I actually got the chance to speak to like the design board that's planning that, and actually try and advocate a little bit for them to put in a music studio in a recording studio. It's like so many of these kids have ideas for songs, ideas for projects, and they do make beats, or they have friends that make beats. And like the amount it would mean to a group of like high school guys that like want to do music, to like be able to have a place to go that has like laptops and mics ready for them to use and stuff. That's like a severely lacking resource in almost every school
instead
district.
of paying so much more.
Yeah.
Or having, and it's nice to be able to, pull up your laptop and record a couple things, drop it on SoundCloud, get a couple plays, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, just to show yourself that it's possible.
Yeah, but then when you start going to the reality behind it, and I think that's something that scares a lot of people. A lot of people over the years would ask me, like, how did I get to where I'm doing, or what am I doing, or how, whatever, and I'm like, you just have to also see the midterm road that comes from this, because you can go ahead and put out a freestyle, that's fine. But when the first person that tells you to keep going, and you feel the need to keep going, and then you start creating, and then you start realizing, okay, well, how do I get better beats? I gotta pay. How do I make better sounding music? I gotta pay. How do I get more people to listen to me? I gotta pay.
Yeah.
How do I get to perform?
It's a pay-to-play business in a lot of ways.
You gotta pay, but that's the small problem. So I'm not saying we need to usher in a new generation of rappers, because that's already happened.
Oh yeah.
But I want to usher in, or help, assist in any way possible, a new wave of creators in the music realm. People who want to step out and do beats, photography, vocals, pop music, rap music, Latino music, whatever the case is. Because I met so many kids just in Framingham alone. Think about how many people in Framingham alone were rapping.
Yeah.
I can tell you, besides Boston and Brockton and Lowell, for example, in Leominster, Framingham alone had more individual creators, whether it was producers, videographers, photographers, vocalists and
rappers, just people that did multiple of those things.
Any town in Metro West or Middlesex County, with the exception of probably up north here. You know what I'm saying? So I just think that that town alone is crazy. I mean, we have people from Framingham that have produced for Lil Tecca that I bought his first beat, for example. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to Day Skills. You know what I'm saying? So there's people like him. Yeah. And then you have people like my boy Christian Brigham. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, Christian, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like
he's like doing pro wrestling right now.
Pro wrestling on NXT every Tuesday. I remember even just talking to
I was in West Side Story with that kid when I was a freshman at Framingham High School. He was like on the football team and got recruited to do musical theater by our director, who was trying to get more people of color essentially to play the roles of the Shark Gang, and recruited a lot of guys from the football team, including Christian Brigham, who did this crazy like front handspring into just this whole like acrobatics thing, and that was one of the things that like kind of gave him that little bug of like performing and stuff, and he did that ever since, and then it was crazy to watch him get into wrestling and become professional at it. It was really cool to see.
It's so weird too, because remember, like some of the people we worked with, like Nicole from Planet Gymnastics, her husband was Christian's tag team partner.
That's
when
crazy.
He was coming up, and we worked with her.
That's crazy.
Casey, his brother, also worked with them in that promotion as well. So
a lot of talent and a lot of different things came out of Framingham. For sure.
But it's nice. It's nice that people are individually paving those ways, and we're able to take videos and have tangible items to show that it happened. That I really hope in the next 10, 15 years this next generation that's between us and the one below us is that generation that's going to reap the benefits of what we were able to pioneer.
Now, speaking of a new wave of rappers, I know I've covered this a little bit on the show, but I was interested to get your take. Like, how do you feel about the AI-generated music and the idea of, like, this new Spotify AI DJ that just came out, and, like, how many parties 5 to 10 years from now will feature only songs made entirely start to finish by a non-human entity? Like, how, like, will human artists get phased out eventually, like any other industry that's suffering from automation?
That scares me. I understand the simplicity because you can't govern an AI. An AI doesn't need money to spend on its life.
Yeah.
So
from a like a record label perspective,
exactly.
An AI is much easier to work with than an artist,
exactly.
who often are volatile people, like, and sporadic people, aren't the most consistent and reliable people, like, just myself included, you know, in terms of, like, you know, inspiration comes and goes, but I don't know.
And
like,
AI is just like, hey, let's make a song about oranges.
On demand, and it'll
and I think
it'll sound good too.
It'll probably sound good. I mean, there's no technical, orange
Technically,
rhyme, but I mean, Lil Wayne definitely has made it up somehow, some way before.
Yeah.
But it's that piece right there. It's that one piece. We're always told you can't rhyme orange and silver, for example, right? Is the AI going to be able to properly incorporate, for example, those two words for either a punchline and rhyme with it, or how are they going to get away with using it at the end of their bar and then change it, whether it's an A-B-A-B or an A-B-C-A-B-C format, for example, or an A-A-B-B-C-C-D-D format, wherever that format is. How are they going to do that? And that takes away the human element.
Right.
You know, and I think that takes away the creativity where we are, where we're from, and that's what paper is.
So, and to push back on that a little bit, because I did hear, again, like, someone talking about this idea earlier today, and they were basically saying, like, there is, like, AI will never be able to create music that is of a human experience, right? It is, there's something about human created music that will be able to burst through the veil or pierce through, and, like, people will always resonate with. And I viscerally agree with that, but at the same time, AI is not thinking on its own at this point. It is taking a bank of songs, basically every song that's basically ever been written, processing all of those lyrics, which are human written and created lyrics. So for me, I think it will be able to generate mood-based songs and songs that really have lines that do resonate with people and send chills down your spine, or it's like something that seems so human, and then maybe 5 years later you find out that song was written by a machine, and you're like, oh, that song meant a lot to me and helped me get through a hard time in my life. Like, it really, and like, we think that we are, you know, and this kind of is a general theme of this show, but humans generally think we are this rarefied being that is like the end all be all on this planet. Like, we can talk more about that if you want, but like, just, and I think AI is that we continue to have that idea of human superiority when we should be really humble in the face of this technology that we're creating, which certainly has the ability to capture and then go beyond even what is the human experience. Like, not just like, it's not gonna just like churn out songs that are only like vapid like pop singles or whatever. Like, it can really probably eventually, if it can't already, like dig deeper and make these like really emotional songs.
Oh yeah, well I think what's also gonna be scarier too is the lyrics. We got to a point where the lyrics sometimes didn't even matter. It was the ambiance in the beat itself and then the flow / delivery, for example. And I think that too will be a problem because then you have AI production.
Right.
You know, I mean, of course, like I said, like we were saying, label-wise, it's easier to maintain an artist who's going to do that. You can pump out a bunch of songs. I mean, no one's going to be Future or Gucci Mane, for example, when it comes to recording a plethora of music in a short period of time during a studio session.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you can AI the lyrics, I mean, AI in the beats is going to be even easier.
Yeah.
So then when you start thinking of, because that was the other thing too, people started feeling like the last 15 years, for example, that soul in some parts of music has been taken out because the labels were specifically engineering and telling you, this is Britney Spears, for example. This is her music. Now this is Lil Uzi Vert, this is his music.
Yeah.
It's not the same as seeing some artists like a Lil Nas X, for example, and being able to at least see some tangible aspects of his everyday life or his life before he got to where he was. You know? It's
there's something special about being able to be in on the rise.
On the rise. Or like Lil Yachty, for example.
Yeah.
Even though to some people he came out of nowhere, it was still enough time for when he did
If
that
you were-
first show to his
Yeah.
first tape that you can tell.
Yeah, if you were paying attention at all on like social media and following that community at the time, guys like Lil Yachty, guys like Jack Harlow, who's huge right now, right? Like I watched, when he was just like a small touring artist in Kentucky and stuff, and now is like a worldwide star. So it's like, and you see that process happen. And guys like Lil Nas X, exactly the same thing, right? You just see this one viral video one day that you I think I laughed the first time I said, and I think that was the point, right? You kind of like, oh, country and rap, like how is this gonna work? But then you listen to it and you're like, well, it is pretty catchy, and then you realize, oh, the demographics for both of these genres are pretty humongous in America, and then before you know it, like he's lap dancing on Satan, and it's like he's just this huge controversial figure, So it's definitely cool to see, and it's interesting also to see how that process changes people. It's like it makes you wonder how you would fare going through that same process of having your life kind of nationally exposed and having people being able to have that like access to your life now. And it's something that I worry about in terms of like, if I can, make this happen and get a bigger audience or whatever, how does that affect you as a person, right? To what extent does, it affect your like relationships, your ability to continue like balancing that personal life and career, right? Your life starts to change, right? In ways that's really awesome and really great. And like, it's always going to be like a balancing act.
Oh yeah,
I think
so.
for sure.
I think it would be cool too. What would be really cool is because one way that I thought music was how it was done from that lens back in 2008, I thought music artists, to the exception of street artists, you almost had to go to a college like Berkeley and get a degree in order to become a professional music artist in any realm, whether you were a writer, whether you were a producer, anything like that.
Same thing like comedy writers, right? All the writers on The Simpsons all went to Harvard and or essentially or Stanford or went to these like elite Ivy League schools.
Exactly. So it's one of those things where it's like, if that's the same in television production, and that's the same in a lot of other realms of, professional sports. In some cases, you may have to go to college, for example, and pay your dues before getting to the NBA, NFL, MLB, for example. Or even just on the music end, I mean, even to be an A&R, like there's just so many ways to do it, and it's unfortunate that there's not enough ways for us to get in elsewhere, besides now using social media. So I really think
and building your own thing, like organically.
Exactly. So this next generation.
But I think seeing artists, exactly, and but also seeing that it can be done, right? Guys
it can be done.
That inspire me, like Russ and people like that who you have seen, like, are still not necessarily like known on a mainstream level all the time, but are certainly winning, by any stretch of the imagination, right? And are touring the world and have their own fan base, right? I think that's better in a way than being a Britney Spears or an iconoclastic figure. Where you're just someone who has your small artist, like an artist that I love that like this is Larry June, who's just always stayed consistent, always very true to the brand. And I saw him back in like 2015 performing with Cousin Stiz in Boston at like Paradise Rock Club. And Stiz is another Boston artist that I love, but like just to see Larry June go from, good job, Larry, and he still says that, but like, good job, Larry, and it's like great crowd work, and seeing him perform back in that and then, and like 8 years later, seeing him now like blowing up, and he has like a project with The Alchemist, and he's doing all these festivals and stuff, but he's always just stayed organic and growth and just putting out his own merch, his own music, his own kind of brand of hip-hop. So it's like, I've always been more drawn to that, right? That idea of like, it'll be more significant if you can grow it yourself organically, be outside of the realm of a label and their development. And AI, yeah. Well, this has been an incredible conversation, my friend. We can keep it going, but I think just for the good of the show, we're already at like 45 here. So.
Oh, already? Wow.
The time does fly when we get going. But thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, and I'll be happy to have you on again anytime. So let's wrap up for now. Until next time, guys. This has been Zach on Earth, and we'll see you next week.